Hi, my name's Harry, Welder and Fabrication. Today we're just looking at Mercedes ML 270 CDI, and basically what we've done is I've taken off the EGR valve, which sits in here like so. There's 3 bolts, 2 at the top, 1 underneath, which you can get to from behind. If you take off the air pipe for the actuator, you've got 1 bolt which goes through this section here, so basically a support bracket, and then between the support bracket and this piece of pipe, it links up to the EGR cooler. Now basically what's happened is, initially I thought that the EGR cooler was leaking, so the link pipe between the EGR valve and the cooler was leaking on here, so I was getting exhaust gas bypassing. So what I've done is I've taken off the intercooler pipe, which is just 1 clip on the front. You pop that back with a screwdriver. Intercooler pipe sits in like so, and then the other end of the pipe goes onto the intercooler itself. So I've taken that off, undone the 3 bolts, taken the support mount bolts off, and then I've wiggled this loose, taken off the bridging pipe, the pipe that goes between the EGR valve and the EGR cooler, which initially I thought was the bit that was leaking, but as it turns out, on the EGR valve itself, the cooler, you can see there where the mount bracket, which is the mount bracket there, the mount bracket would have sat on like so. Over time it's just fatigued and it's just sheared off. So what we're going to do is, I've cleaned it all up, so I've put some brake cleaner on it, wiped it all over, wire brushed it, cleaned the stainless fitting back, cleaned the bracket back, and then I'm going to TIG weld that back in like so. So it's the actual part itself, you can buy about 30 quid, so they're not overly expensive, but in this case, because I can weld it back on, that's what I'm going to do. The only thing I would say is when you're stripping it down, it's worth just, I've labelled up the bolts, so where they come from, just so that when I put it back together, so I've got top mount and bottom bracket mount there, 2 for the flange on the back for the cooler itself, and the 3 bolts that hold the EGR valve on. Okay, so what I'm going to do is weld the bracket back on, and then we'll fit it back together. I've bolted the EGR cooler back on, so the 2 bolts in the back end, they're nice and tight now, so I can put the mounting bolts back on the bracket, and the bracket which I've re-welded back on underneath, that can go, the bolt can go back in there. So they're all E11s, all the bolts that go on, they're all E11s. So before I put the EGR valve back on, I put the O-ring back on the cooler, took it off before just to make sure it didn't melt when I weld it up, and you can see now all the residue and the oil where the engine's breathing a little bit. So I've done a few miles now, so where it's breathing a little bit, you've got oil residue building up on the inside. I'm just going to use a bit of brake cleaner, a bit of rag, scrape out any residue first, and then just give it a good wipe round, just give it a good clean up before I fit it. As it's off, I might as well give it a good clean up before I refit it. Right, so I've put the EGR valve back on, so the 3 bolts are back in. What I have done is the little connecting pipe between the EGR cooler and the EGR valve, I've just put a tiny little bit of copper slip just around that edge where the O-ring is, just to help it, just smeared a little bit around there just to help it slide on, because it's quite a tight fit. So that's all located up nicely. I put the bottom bolt in first to make sure I could locate it properly, done it up finger tight, and then located the top 2, done them up finger tight, and then I nicked the bottom one up first and then these top 2 after. I put the bolt back in for the mounting bracket, which sits on the bottom of the EGR valve as well. You just have to push this hose out, the bottom hose out of the way for the power steering pump. And then what I'm going to do now is just slide back on the last bit of hose. So this goes from the intercooler to the EGR valve. So put it onto the intercooler first. I'll just slide on like so. Just slip it underneath, twist it round, and then all I'm going to do is take a screwdriver, and there's just a sprung loaded clip on the outside. Just going to peel that back like so. Slide that in. If I just pop that clip off a little bit further, wiggle it in like so, make sure it's all the way back in so it's sitting nice and flush around the EGR valve, and then once we've done that we can just pop this clip back on and that's it, won't come off now. So there's a Jubilee clip down the bottom in here which we're going to do up, and that's it, we're ready to run it up. Brilliant, cheers.